Coal ash are the trace inorganic materials that are naturally occurring in coal that are left over after we use the coal to produce energy for our customers, for the public, and for businesses. EPA extensively studied coal ash management for decades and repeatedly determined that coal ash is not hazardous, but can be safely managed under federal regulations that the agency issued in 2015 to ensure that coal ash would be managed in an environmentally protective manner. Well, about 51% of the coal ash we produce is beneficially used in a range of applications in this country. More than half of the concrete that's poured in this country has coal ash in it, and that makes that concrete more durable, stronger, lighter weight. It's a key element of our infrastructure. And coal ash is used in the concrete in buildings like the One World Trade Center or the Ronald Reagan International Trade Center in Washington, D.C. When we use coal ash in those beneficial uses, we conserve natural resources, we save energy, and we reduce emissions. Protection of groundwater resource was the primary driver in EPA's rule. The agency designed its rule to ensure that groundwater would be protected. When we close in place, extensive groundwater monitoring systems are put in place and will be maintained for decades to ensure that we're not having any impact on the groundwater. EPA's rule that was finalized in 2015 has requirements for how we manage and dispose of coal ash. We have a deadline that we have to finalize our plans for closing ash basins to ensure that those are being done in a safe and environmentally protective manner. EPA's rule establishes two closure methods, closure in place and closure by removal. Both are safe, and EPA points that out. EPA also acknowledges in their rule that the majority of units are going to close in place. What's important to keep in mind is throughout and following the closure process, the industry is going to ensure that the environment is protected. There's going to be long-term, multi-decade groundwater monitoring. The safe and environmentally protective management of coal ash is a priority for the industry. When weighing the two options that are in EPA's rule, closure in place or closure by removal, we will be taking into account site-specific factors. And throughout and following the closure process, we'll be working to ensure that we're protecting the environment. Because the rule requires that your closure method meet the standards, meet the environmental protection standards, the groundwater protection standards, both options are going to be protective. The EPA didn't establish a preference in the rule. And EPA recognized in the rule that the majority of units were going to be closing in place. Closure in place is an option in EPA's rule and one that the agency says is safe. Throughout and following the closure process, environmental standards will be followed to ensure that we're not having an impact on either surface water or groundwater. The first step in closure in place is the removal of water from the basin. That water is treated to meet stringent state and federal standards. After the water is removed, an impermeable cap is placed over the basin and grass grown on top to ensure that water doesn't come into the closed basin. Groundwater monitoring will continue for decades following closure in place to measure any potential impacts to the environment. If any impacts are determined or if any impacts are identified, those will be addressed. When you close by removal, the water has to be removed and treated from the ash basin, and then the ash itself has to be removed. So there's construction, there's safety concerns, there's disruption to the local environment at the site that's being closed, disruption at the new site where the ash is being transported to, and then there's impacts to the community along the way from the closed site to the new disposal site. Another factor that must be considered in closure by removal are the transportation impacts. When you remove the ash and transport it to an ultimate off-site disposal facility, we're talking about hundreds of thousands of truckloads of ash moving across the roads. And there are safety considerations associated with that, and environmental impacts and emissions associated with that transport.